Hi, everyone. Welcome to Association Rockstars, where we hear about the journey and insights of amazing association executives and partners who are building the industry of tomorrow. I'm your host, Lowell Aplebaum, CEO of Vista, Cova, where we partner with organizations on strategic facilitation. And with me today is Joanna Pineda. Joanna is the founder, CEO, and chief troublemaker at Matrix Group International, Inc., which is making me rethink my own business cards. She works with clients.
You need a good title.
I do
Well,
need,
you have a good title, you need a funny title.
maybe that will be the next podcast. Joanna works with clients at the onset of projects to help organizations define their goals, target audiences, and service offerings. She's devoted to her kids, her company, and her husband, and is a huge fan of Taekwondo, who never goes anywhere without her camera. And she even recently earned her black belt. Joanna, so happy to have you with us today.
Lowell, it's a huge honor for me to be on your show. Thank you.
So, always at the start of our conversations, one thing that we like to inquire about is what is a strength that you have, a superpower, if my little ones were framing it, that as you think about your career journey and your life journey, what is one superpower that has helped you thrive, that has really brought you success?
You know, that's a really good question. And I'm not sure what my staff would say, but I'll tell you that my children would say that my superpower is asking questions.
Hmm.
And I guess it makes sense that I have a podcast. And I guess it makes sense that I'm at the start of the project where we're asking all these questions. And whenever I come home from a trip, Lowell, my oldest son says, "So who'd you sit next to this time?" Because I am convinced that I sit next to the most interesting person on the plane. And if they're willing to engage with me, man, Lowell, I could tell you just amazing stories of the people that I've met. From the guy who makes, crema for Latino supermarkets in the
Yeah.
US to the woman who was on the board of HRC on this last flight to the woman who does HR strategy. And she used to be at IBM and now has her own business. And I had never really heard of the concept of HR strategy. We spent the whole time talking about it. I just ask a lot of questions. And of course, that's what I do on my podcast. I think that's my superpower. I ask good questions. I hope I do.
Do you find, I mean, as you think about your earlier on in your career journey, was that place of inquiry, right? Of like walking that path? Were you always a questioner?
You know, I don't know, honestly. I think that I think maybe it got really cultivated in college. I was in this amazing freshman dorm program. It was called Structured Liberal Education. It was this dorm-based program, and the person who ran it, Professor Mark Mancall, was amazing. He was all about inquiry, and what he was able to do was kind of source the best professors on campus, and he encouraged us to ask questions. The whole thing was inquiry. It was, how can we ask good questions so that we get good answers? How can we ask questions even when we'll never find the answers? How can we ask questions even if we think we know the answers? And
Mm,
those were his mantras. This is the first time someone's asked me this, Lowell. I think it's from Professor Mancall, freshman year.
I love that. Well, shout out to the professor who planted the seeds of what's been something that's grown into a place of expertise, certainly. Before Matrix, what was the journey before there, and how did inquiry play a role there, or how did you get to this place?
Yeah, so right before Matrix, I was with another agency. It was called Business Information Network. And that was in, gosh, when the heck was that? That was in 1991. And this was before the web. This was bulletin board time, Lowell.
Huh.
So I went to work for this company, and the company was doing bulletin boards for federal agencies and for a few associations. And I'll tell you my claim to fame is maybe with this company, my 15 minutes of fame, because in 1992, or maybe it was 93, no, it was 92, the Federal Communications Commission issued an RFP for an online bidding system because the FCC was bidding out the spectrum. And
Hmm.
I worked for this company that I worked for, Business Information Network, won a subcontract deal to this other company, Tradewinds, to build the online bidding system. And so That was the very first auction that led to the cell phone explosion. The first auction was 3 months long and raised $1 billion for the government, and I managed that project. So it was crazy. It was absolutely crazy what the economists at the FCC were sending us research and guidance about how to run the auction. They were changing their mind about the auction. Should it be open outcry? Should it be sealed bid? Should it be, simultaneous? Should be whatever. And they're like, we were kind of following along, trying to figure out what we're going to do. And ultimately it was sealed bid, kind of incremental each day. And every day there were like 7 or 8 rounds, and it went on for 3 months. And then finally it closed. And so the team that I was managing, we built the online bidding system and then managed the auction for the FCC for a couple of years, and then they took it over. So I was doing that, but also I was working with associations. And my boss said, I think there's something here. Can you do something with this? So I joined ASAE in 1991 and thought, wow, there's like something here, right? There's this community of people who want to be together, and there's this information that these organizations are trying to collect and disseminate. And bulletin boards were a great way to do that. And then in 93, the web came along, right? And I remember one of my developers said, Joanna, you have to see this thing. It's called the World Wide Web. And we all kind of crowded around his monitor. And at that point, I think we had a Netcom account and some open source browser. And in 94, we bid our first website. So that was that. And before that, Lowell, I worked for a nonprofit. I worked for the San Francisco Education Fund as a fundraiser. I think few people know that I actually have some nonprofit experience because I've been, kind of on the other side for so long. But for 2 years, I raised money for collaborative programs in San Francisco. And the mission of the fund was to improve public education in San Francisco.
You're so naturally fluent in mission and how that impacts and intersects with organizations and with relationship building. Does not surprise me.
Thank you.
Nonprofit piece to your background. There's so many questions I want to ask about, but I'm incredibly interested. Right, you've been within the association realm, it sounds like, for 3 decades.
Yes. I started when I was 10. Maybe even 5.
18. I was going to say 7, but
yeah,
10's good too, double digits. I would love to hear just a little bit of your reflection of over the course of that trajectory. Anything you would identify as places where associations have grown and done amazingly well, your observation of missed opportunities, where we're going. Let's start with the reflective. Then I want to go to the projective. What has that told you about the future? But what have you seen during the course of those times?
One thing that I remember actually having an explicit conversation with my chairman at the time, we said, wow, most associations before the web had a few means of communicating with their members, right? They knew who their members were, and they would send them documents, they would fax, and they would email, and they would gather. And then when the web came along, they suddenly had this unparalleled and really beforehand not available to them method of communicating with the public or with the customers of their members. And before, if they wanted to reach the public, they had to go through the media. Like I remember match services and PR firms, and obviously those are still really important. Right. But, an association like maybe the home builders before really mostly communicated with their members, but now they can communicate with the customers of the members and to the public. So I think that's been a really big change in the sense of we kind of removed the intermediaries who used to have the ultimate control over these communications channels. And if you're savvy about how you run your communications, you can create your own, channels. And today, the really savvy associations have these channels, through the web, but also through social media, right? And through YouTube. So amazing, what associations now have really at their fingertips to reach all these different audiences. So that's one thing that I've been reflecting on.
With the advent of greater tools that allow you to connect easier, to communicate with less lift, although that also creates more noise, I want to bring in, if I can, your power of inquiry, right? Because it's not about how many questions you ask, right? It's about asking the right questions or the powerful ones and also knowing how to listen. I mean, that's the power of the questions. How well do you think associations do that from your perspective? Ask the meaningful questions, actually take the time to listen.
I think it's a mixed bag. And I think that associations probably listen to the people who are most engaged because it's easy, right?
Yeah.
They're board members, they're committee members, and they're also really loud because they're so involved. And I think what happens is there's certain audiences that don't get a seat at the table. And so we don't hear their voices. And I actually, in the podcast, Lowell, I've heard some really pretty amazing insights from some of the execs who took the time to ask questions.
Yeah.
And so like here's just a simple example. Wade Kaler from FCSI Americas, he said that they were planning their conference, and historically Friday night of their conference was always the free night because they said, oh, then people can kind of do their own thing. And during a planning meeting, they just said, oh, we're going to keep, Friday night free. And apparently a couple of the new members said, I hate that night. And he was shocked. And he said, whoa, why do you hate that night? And they said, because we're new and we don't know anyone and no one takes us out to lunch or dinner. No one takes us out to dinner because we're nobody in the industry yet. And Wade thought, oh my God. So these new members are sitting in their hotel rooms because it's not family reunion for them.
Right.
It's not 3 invitations to the vendor, dinners. And so he said, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do a barbecue. And so they did a barbecue, and all those people who had all their, previously had their own dinners ended up coming as well. And in fact, apparently a bunch of the vendors said, this is even better because instead of taking one client out to dinner, I can connect with 20 of them. But also it's really, really fun to be in a party atmosphere.
I love that. Well, inclusivity needs to be intentional, right? And so if you don't think about all the perspective.
I think we need to be in conversation all the time with our members at every opportunity. And I actually think that post-pandemic, these conversations have to happen even more.
I mean, you are amazing in that because you embody that in so many ways. The podcast and your interviews have insightful but such a conversational tone. And we were just talking beforehand. If you are connected with Joanna on LinkedIn, which you should be, you'll see that she's amazing at building network through having intersect opportunities to just catch up with people, right? To touch base to see how they are. Again, is that a post-pandemic thing of like reestablishing connection and community? Is that something that's always been part of your approach to building community and relationships?
It's definitely a pandemic thing, actually. So during the pandemic, when we were mostly, holed up in our homes, I was really itchy. I'm an extrovert and I love people and I love meeting with people. And so there were a few people who would allow me to take a walk with them or would say, let's have coffee and let's sit outside. And so that became a regular occurrence. And then as the pandemic started winding down, I thought, and I'm still working from home a lot. And even though I'm with my team, all day long and I'm talking to clients, I just found that I needed the 3D connection much more. So I just started inviting anybody who would have coffee with me to meet at the coffee shop. And so Lowell, a couple times a week, I drop my son off at school and then I'll say, let's meet for coffee in Arlington or Alexandria or DC just for 45 minutes, an hour. And it's turned into these moments of joy. I don't have an agenda. I just want to check in with folks. And I think when you don't have an agenda too, you just kind of open up yourself to what's happening. And then, here's another thing that we do at the office. Because I have all these conversations, my director of marketing actually started this. Every couple of months, she'll say, Joanna, what themes are coming through in your podcast and in your coffees? And I wasn't intentionally thinking about it, but I guess at one meeting I said, hey, you guys, 3 association execs have mentioned this. It's kind of interesting. Let's pay attention to this.
Yeah.
And so then the next month she said, okay, what's coming through? So now it's an intentional part of our Monday meeting to say, what are these themes?
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything to them, but it's an opportunity for me to reflect.
Well, I'll say 2 things. The first is you say you walk into those coffees without an agenda, but at least what I hear is you do have an agenda, which is the agenda is the other person, right? Like connecting with them and hearing them and being present. That's very much. a really good empathetic agenda. But you can't say that without igniting my curiosity. What is a theme that you're hearing? I need to hear one of them at least that you've heard recently. You feel like
Oh,
tell
yeah, sure. So, one theme that is coming through is I'm calling it the post pandemic letdown of leadership.
Mm,
So, during the pandemic, we were so focused on survival and we were all really united.
yeah,
And now that we're post pandemic, if the execs aren't really presenting a very strong vision for what's next and how are we changed and what is the kind of what's the result of this on our organization, there's a leadership vacuum and people are left feeling hungover.
yeah,
So there, I think some execs are saying, my team is asking more of me
yeah.
because they're saying, what's next? Where do we go now?
That's interesting.
And they're also saying, I'm tired. That's another theme that's coming through from the execs is my team is asking more of me. I'm not traveling again and I'm tired. Another theme is everyone's redoing their strategic plan because I think they're saying we're changed as an organization. What does it look like?
Right.
Another theme is how do we include different types of people in our membership to give them greater voice? So a bunch of the medical associations, for example, are really thinking about that. And some of them, within some of these organizations, it's a fight,
Yeah.
right? Within others, it's actually a welcome change. And then I think one other theme, I'll just say this, is mental health continues to be at the top of execs' minds, where they're not just worried about kind of the mental health of their staff, but the mental health of their membership.
Yeah.
And they're saying, what can we do as an association? I'm sorry, Lowell, there's one more theme. And I actually did a webinar on this with Tara Puckey and Melanie Gottlieb. And
Amazing.
we did a webinar on the topic of the end of expertise, which is, if we as a society are kind of increasingly distrustful of the experts, what happens to the associations that have historically held themselves up as the expert or the voice?
Right.
And what's coming through is, especially in the industries and professions where there's a large amount of distrust, the members are saying, how can you help us? And a lot of associations say, we don't know.
I have conversations I can have about any of those. I'll just touch on just the last one. At least I'm seeing in the organizations I'm working with, the challenge of expertise is that organizations are starting to lean more rather than being the expert of being the convener of experts. So that
Yes.
you have multifaceted voices together at the table. It's interesting. The past 6 months, I've facilitated a number of times much more complex design, but gatherings of anywhere from 5 to 20 associations that all center around like one industry to address an industry-wide challenge, workforce pipeline, next generation, saying like not one of us are going to solve this
Ah,
alone, right? And so actually, isn't that like my organization's the expert? How do we gather the collective expertise? How do we convene to leverage those resources so that partnership isn't something that we just philosophize about, but we take to action?
right, right. I love that. So tell us about these. So like, in what context is this happening
Well,
and what are
that
they doing?
that I'll say that is another conversation because that
Okay.
focuses
All
on you
right.
today. But
Okay.
what they're trying to accomplish is the larger, higher level view of what are challenges to an industry, right? And recognize that even if there's a membership organization and a credentialing organization and an advocacy organization, and like all the different organizations, all the subspecialties, that none of them are going to move the needle about an industry-wide challenge individually the way they could if they actually coordinated and said who's doing what,
Ah,
how do we work together. I think that there's an intersect there with the expertise piece of it. That's probably a different podcast.
yeah, yeah.
You clearly you intentionally ask questions. Curiosity drives. You do the podcast. You have these meetings. As you think about your own journey, in the coming years, what do you what do you hope that you want to learn in the coming years? So there are places you want to grow. Is there any place that you turn to for learning?
Wow. Learning, right? So it comes in different areas. I'm in a CEO peer group, and so we ask a lot of questions, and there's a lot of learning there. There's always some book that someone's recommending, and I'm thankfully still a reader. I read and I listen to a lot of books. I'm still part of a lot of conferences and education networks. I'm a big language learner. Some of you don't know that, love language. So I have my little Duolingo streak. And in terms of what I want to learn, there's always some technical thing that I want to learn, but
Yeah.
there's always leadership things that I want to learn. And like something happened a few weeks ago, Lowell, and I thought, God, Joanna, 25 years of business and you didn't know this. And I did this and my coach said, it's okay, Joanna, we're always learning. And at
Yes.
least you learned the lesson now, is what he said.
I mean, the more you learn how much there is to learn. So that's all right, right? Steps along the way. These conversations always go by so quickly. As you think further in your future, when you're at a point when you want to step full time into Taekwondo and maybe take a step back from the association world, the work that you've done over these decades, what do you hope is the legacy that you'll leave behind, the impact on the industry?
Oh, gosh, that's a big question, Lowell.
Well,
I
you're
don't,
making a big impact.
I don't know that I've thought about legacy, and I have a funny story for you because I always have stories. So
Yeah.
last year, I'm in Vistage, which is the CEO network, and I got this award, and it was called the Lifetime Achievement Award. And Lowell, I did not promote this award, even though it was a big honor. And the reason I didn't was, and I told my coach, I said, Pete, it sounds like I'm about to ride
Seems
off
like you're
into the
done, right?
sunset. It sounds like, the actress who didn't win any awards during her career, and now that as she's riding off into the sunset, we're going to give her an award. So I said, mm-mm. I said, thank you for the award. I'm not promoting this. So I feel a little bit that way about legacy. But if you were to ask me, how do I want people to remember me?
Yeah.
Maybe we go back to stories, Lowell. I want people to remember me as someone who helped people honor and tell their stories.
I love that. Well, all evidence to how masterfully you do bring stories out of people, tie together their brilliance in ways that they don't even hear themselves sometimes, and really elevate so many others. And it's nice to hear, who wasn't promoted, that as a unique and much needed skill set in this world was recognized, and I hope will be many times in the future.
Lowell,
Joanna,
thank you so much. That was so nice. Thank you.
well, you do amazing things. Everyone, Joanna, will you do a plug for your podcast?
Oh, yes. So Associations Thrive is a weekly podcast on all the podcast networks. And every week I interview an association exec. It's basically an association or a nonprofit CEO. And I ask them three questions. Tell me about your organization. Tell me about your journey to becoming CEO, and tell me about the things that your organization is doing differently to thrive. And Lowell, I never know what we're going to talk about. And every single conversation is meaningful. And
Yeah.
then there's always two or three nuggets that take my breath away
Yes.
because of something that they're doing or something that that they're doing differently or something that they chanced upon. And I'll share one thing with you. Deb McKinnon is the podcast episode that dropped today. She's the executive director of ACTEC, the American College of Trust and Estate Counsel. And at the very end of the interview, we were talking about our conferences, and she said, Joanna, when you're new to ACTEC, you have a blue dot on your badge. And you have that blue dot for 5 years. Now, Lowell, most people don't want to be labeled the newbie, right?
5 years.
For
Yeah.
5 years, you're the newbie. And she said, oh no, Joanna, some people tell us, can I please keep the blue dot? And I said, why on earth would people want to keep the blue dot? And she said, culturally, in the organization, they train the leadership, the board, and the committee members, and the really senior fellows to look for the blue dot and introduce themselves and help these new fellows navigate the organization. So imagine very senior people like making a beeline towards you to say, hey, I'm Joanna Pineda, I'm, X, and, welcome.
Right.
And I said, wait, what do you mean? This is intentional? Like you're not just hoping that this will happen? She said, no, we are not just hoping. We are intentional about how we train our leadership to look for the blue dots. And it creates this very welcoming environment. tiny slice of the podcast took my breath away.
Yeah.
So simple, Lowell, and yet life changing for a conference, right?
Well, you think about anyone who's wearing that blue dot, right? Like the memory and the loyalty that's being built from there, right?
Yes,
They don't have to push their way and they're being welcomed. Uh,
right.
and that intentional inclusion.
So those are the types of things I get on the podcast, and every single week I never know what the exact is going to say, but it's always amazing. And Lowell, I had you on, and you shared these amazing insights.
It was a pleasure to be on, and everyone should tune in and listen because you do hear brilliance every single week. Joanna, thank you so much for making time to be with us and to chat with me a little bit. Your journey has been impressive. What you do is impressive, and I love the questions that you ask. I can't wait to hear more of them.
Lowell, it was an honor. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone tuned in. Thank you to Amy Hager, who's there chatting with you all and keeping all the social conversation going. We hope you'll join with us next time, next month again. Until then, Association Rock On.